This is part 97 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss implementing autocomplete functionality using jQuery Autocomplete Widget. This is how we want the output to be. We want to list all the students within a table, and we also want to provide search functionality. For example, if I type letter M within the search text box, we want to display all the students whose name start with letter M. And then as soon as I select a student, and then once I click search button, we want to display that selected student within the table. Let's see how to achieve this using jQuery Autocomplete Widget. For this demo, we'll be using this table tblStudents. Here is the SQL script to create and populate this table with some sample data. I'll have the script available on my blog in case if you need it. The first step is to add an ADO.NET entity data model based on this table tblStudents. Here I have a blank ASP.NET MVC4 application, so let's go ahead and add an ADO.NET entity data model. So select data under install templates, ADO.NET entity data model, and let's call this student data model. We want to generate our model from the database, so click next. And we want our connection string to be saved as sample db context within the web.config file. Click next. So this is going to connect to the database and retrieve all the tables, views, and stored procedures. We're interested in table tblStudents, so let's expand tables, select table students, and we want our models to be living in models namespace. Click finish. So this should generate an entity with name tblStudent, but let's go ahead and change that to student. Let's build our solution so that this student entity class is compiled. Now let's add a controller, and let's call it home controller, and let's use this empty MVC controller template. Click add. So first let's implement search functionality, and then we'll see how to implement autocomplete feature. Alright, so the first thing to do here is to create an instance of our sample database context class. So within this auto-generated file, we have sample db context class, which will help us connect to the database and retrieve students information. So within this MVCDemo.Models namespace, we have sample db context. So within our home controller, let's include MVCDemo.Models namespace, and let's create an instance of our sample db context class, and this object has got students property, which is going to give us the list of students, and we are going to pass them to the view. Okay, now let's go ahead and add index view, and let's create a strongly typed view against student model, and we want this scaffold template to be list. So let's select that, click add. So this should add index view. Okay, now we want our index view to look something like this. Okay, so we want a table with a border, and we don't want the create link and these links, edit details and delete. So let's get rid of this td right here, and then let's also get rid of this table head, and let's get rid of this h2 tag and paragraph element, and let's set border for our table, and let's use a div tag and set the font family. So div, let's use style attribute, and let's set font family to Arial, and let's move this closing div tag to the end. Okay, so at this point, if we run the application, we should be able to list all the students. Okay, alright, so the next step is to provide the search interface. Okay, so let's flip to the index view. So we need a form tag to be able to search, and to generate the form tag we can use html.beginForm HTML helper. Okay, so let's wrap the call to beginForm HTML helper with using a using statement, so that we'll have the closing form tag auto generated for us. So using @html.beginForm, and then we want this word name and then a text box and then a button control. So let's type name, and let's say we want that to be bolded, and then we want a text box. So @html.textbox. So let's specify the name as search term. Okay, and then I'm going to use a different overloaded version of this text box HTML helper, where we can specify the value. The value is going to be null. But then look at this. I'm interested in this third attribute, HTML attributes, and using these HTML attributes, I'm going to specify ID for this text box. In a bit, we'll see how we are going to make use of this ID. So I'm going to call this text box as txt search. Alright, and finally we need submit button. So input type equals submit, and the value is search. Alright, so this should give us the interface, and once we click the search button, we should be able to search based on the text that we have entered into this text box. So we need another index action method which responds to the post operation. So this one is responding to the get request. So we need another index action method that responds to HTTP post. Alright. So basically, when we enter something into the text box and click search, we should be able to pass that entered value to this function. So let's include a parameter, and the name of this parameter must match the name of the control, so that the default ASP.NET MVC model binder can pass the value of this text box to this parameter. Okay, so let's use this same name as the parameter name. Okay, so if string dot is null or empty, so if the search term is null or empty, then let's say we want to retrieve all of the students and then display them within the table. Okay, so here we have an instance of our sample DB context. db.students should give us all the students, but then let's create a variable which can hold list of students. So list of students, and let's call it students. So students equals db.students.toList. Okay, on the other hand, if that search term is not null or empty, then we know that user has typed something into the text box, and we want to filter the students based on their name. Okay, so students equals db.students is going to give us the complete list, but then we want to filter them, so I'm going to use a where clause where x such that x.name, the name of the student, should start with whatever they have typed into the text box. So let's pass that to this function, and then let's go ahead and convert that to the list. And finally, let's pass this students list to our view. So at this point, we should have search functionality. So let's go ahead and run this. So when the web form first loads, it will list all the students. And look at this, when I type M and then click search, I have the 2 students whose name start with M. On the other hand, if I don't type anything, click search, all the students will be listed, because that's how we have implemented our controller action method. So if the search term is null or empty, then return all the students. Alright, very good. But notice that at the moment I don't have autocomplete. I type letter M and it doesn't show up all the students whose name start with letter M. Alright, so let's implement that using jQuery Autocomplete Widget. So the first step in order to implement the autocomplete feature is to download the autocomplete widget from jQueryui.com. So get to this website, click on download button. So this is going to display us all the UI widgets. So there are several of them, but let's uncheck all of them, and then we are interested in autocomplete widget. The moment we select that, notice that all the dependencies are also auto selected, and then click this download button. So this should download the required JavaScript and CSS files. I have already downloaded them. So you'll have this folder. They will actually be downloaded in a zip file, so you have to extract them, and once you extract, you'll have this folder. Within this folder, we are interested in JS and CSS folders. So within the JS folder, we'll have the required JavaScript files. So let's get into the JS file. So I'm interested in this jQuery file itself and the minified custom JavaScript file. Okay, so let's copy this files and then move them to the scripts folder. And the next thing is we need CSS files as well. So let's go back. So click on this, open the CSS folder, and within that you have images, and then there is a CSS file. So I'm going to take this minified CSS file. So copy both of them and then paste them into the content folder in your project. Okay, so at this point we have the required CSS and JavaScript files. Okay, so let's go back to the index view. Let's drag and drop this CSS file and these two jQuery files. Okay, and let's fix this path. Let's use tilde symbol. Tilde indicates root directory. So from the root directory, navigate to content directory and then get that file. Similarly, from the root directory, navigate to scripts and get the jQuery files. Alright, now we need to write some JavaScript code to implement autocomplete feature. So let's use a script tag here. Script type equals text/JavaScript. Okay, so when we type, this is the text box for which we want to implement autocomplete feature. So we need to first find this text box control. And if you look at the HTML that we have written here, what is the ID of the text box? txt search. So we are going to use this ID to find this text box and then implement the autocomplete feature. So to find that text box using jQuery, so $, we're going to write a function. Okay, so $, we are going to use the ID selector. In jQuery, ID selector is pound symbol. So pound, and then the ID of the control, which is txt search. So txt search, find that control, and then all you need to do is invoke the autocomplete function. Okay, and this function expects some options, so we need to pass those options. Okay, so now what are those options? How do I know that? Now on this jQuery website, on the left hand side you can see API documentation. Click that button and you can see there autocomplete widget. So widgets, and here we have autocomplete widget. So if we click on that, it's going to show us what are all the options that this autocomplete function expects. Look at this, there are several options. The most important one is the source. Okay, so what is the source going to do? Look at this, when we type a letter into this text box, we want to go out to the database, retrieve all the students whose name starts with that letter M. Okay, so we need a controller action method within our application which can take the text that we type into this text box, go to the database table and retrieve all the names and give it to this text box. Okay, so first we need to implement a controller function. Okay, and that's what we are going to specify using the source attribute, source option. So let's go ahead and specify that. And the way we specify, again, you can check the documentation here. look at that, this is how we specify the source. So if it's a function that we want to call, then you specify source and then the name of your function. Basically here they have hard coded the list, okay, but we are going to use a function. So let's specify source. So source colon, and we are going to invoke url.action HTML helper. And then what is the name of the action method? We're going to implement that. Let's call it, for example, get students. We haven't implemented this function yet. We'll implement that in just a bit. Okay, so that's it. All we need to do is we need to implement this controller action method and we'll be done. Okay, so let's get to the home controller and then implement get students function. So public, and this function should return JSON result. Okay, so the return type of the function is going to be JSON result, and let's call it get students. So let's copy the name. And another important thing is the parameter, because keep in mind whatever we type into this text box, we need to pass that to this function so that it can go to the database and retrieve those students. So what should be the name of the parameter? That is very important. The name should be term, okay, because that's what jQuery expects, and you can see that in the jQuery documentation. Okay, so the callback has two arguments with a single term property, so we need to specify that as the parameter here. Alright, so let's copy this and make the required changes. So we need to create an instance of a sampledb context class, create a student variable, list of students, and then so basically whatever the user types there, what we need to do, we need to take the term and then filter using where clause. So where x such that x dot name starts with whatever term that is coming into this function. And then we don't want to return list of students. What do we want to return? So when we type a letter here, we actually want to show the names of the students. Okay, so we want to return list of strings. Names are nothing but strings, so list of student names are nothing but list of strings. So here let's specify that list of string students, and then before we convert it to the list, from the filtered students list, I want to select just their name. So I'm going to use the select link function and specify that we want just the name, and then convert this to a list. And then all we need to do is pass this back to the view. And to do that, look at this, the return type is JSON result, so we need to convert that into a JSON result, and to do that we can use JSON function, pass the students, and another parameter we need to specify the JSON request behavior. We want to do that using a get request. So that's all there to it. Let's go ahead and run this now. Okay, look at this. The moment I type M, I get the students whose name start with letter M. Okay, so I select Mark Hastings, click search. Look at that, we have that student there. Right, so when we type M again, we have those students. If I just leave it as M, click search, I get all the students whose name starts with M. Okay. On the other hand, if we don't type anything, click search, we get all the students back. Alright, now look at this here. When I type letter M, just one letter, I get the students whose names start with M. But let's say I want to control this. Until I type 2 characters, I don't want this auto complete feature to kick in. So how to achieve that? This jQuery autocomplete widget has got several options. So all the options are here. Another interesting option is this min length. So if you want the autocomplete feature to be kicking in only when the user types 2 characters or more, then you can specify min length as 2. Okay, so let's see that in action. So I want to specify another option. So that's min length option. So let's copy that option name. So minimum length is going to be 2. So let's save that, run it once again. And look at this. If I type M now, I don't get autocomplete. But the moment I type A, that's the second character, we get autocomplete. Click search, we get all the students whose name starts with MA. Alright. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.